Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 335 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Wiley. And today's episode is on Why Am I Disillusioned with Clinical Psychology? And it is Saturday, the 12th of July 2025 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is very thought-provoking, and this actually isn't anything that we talk about in mainstream clinical psychology, because I've spoken to some other psychology students. In fact, after an open day, this is basically what we spoke about. Us three ambassadors, we had a very late lunch, we had a brilliant time spending time together, and this is one of the topics that we spoke about. Also, this week I spoke, since I've recorded this podcast episode, with a brilliant woman at Outreach at my university, who's also a counsellor, and she basically agreed with a lot of this. Because I didn't realise this, but even though she's actually a fully qualified counsellor, she still has to work for free, and the only money she makes from her counselling is her own private practice. But the one day a week when she's in a school, seeing lots of clients, she's doing that as a volunteer, just so she can build up her hours and get accredited. Which I think is really hard and quite disgusting, to be honest, because she's brilliant. She really cares about her clients, and she's really, really skillful. Like, we actually have some quite in-depth conversation about different techniques at times, where different situations and techniques help a client, and then they're not so much helpful with others, and she's always learning. She puts her heart and soul into her counselling work. So I fully believe that she should be paid, that she shouldn't have to work for free after she's done all of this hard work and all of her studying. Furthermore, because her financial situation is changing, she needs to earn more money. And thankfully, she's amazing and she's so dedicated to her counselling work that she would take another job just to prioritise her counselling work. And my point here though, is that personally I think it's ridiculous that we need to prioritise working for free to be able to advance our careers when we've already done so much studying and we want to help people and improve lives. We should be paid, we should be rewarded for that ambition and that want to help people. And we don't do it for the money. I think that's part of the issue. Like, I love helping people. I don't really want to do it for the money, but because we live in a capitalist world, we have to do it for the money. But this is something that I talk about in a lot more depth in today's podcast episode. So you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn about the realities of working in clinical psychology and trying to even get your first ever clinical psychology job. So there's a lot of food for thought coming up in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, what does caffeine do to the sleeping brain? For many of us, a cup of coffee is the perfect kickstart to the morning. We know that caffeine can boost alertness and cognitive performance. And most of us know that especially when it's consumed close to bedtime, it can make it harder to fall asleep. Few of us, though, know what a late day coffee does to the sleeping brain and the various stages of sleep it cycles through. Now, a paper in communication biology suggests some worrying effects, with young adults more vulnerable than older adults. and I will read a paragraph from the BPS Research Digest write-up. The researchers also separately analysed the data of 22 young participants aged between 20 and 27, and the other 18 middle-aged participants between 41 and 58. They found that during REM sleep, caffeine did not change brain activity in the older group, but in the younger group it did. In fact, during REM, the brain activity of older adults on the placebo group looked similar to the brain activity of the young adults after consuming caffeine. This supports the hypothesis that aging alters sleep EEG dynamics in a similar manner to caffeine, potentially diminishing its impact in the middle-aged group. Okay, so speaking of caffeine, I'm actually recording this at 9:05 at night, which is not a good idea to be honest, because last night I was out with my friends. We were having a night on Canterbury. I don't drink, but I was enjoying spending time with them, and they really did drink. But it was a brilliant night out. I had a lot of fun. We didn't get home, and I didn't get to bed till 2 a.m. in the morning, so I'm very sleep deprived at the moment. But I'm doing this podcast because I love it. I've got no other choice. I've got no other time to record it. I so should have recorded it earlier. But anyway, so caffeine can be really helpful. I am actually out of instant coffee at the moment, which would have been a lifesaver. I would have loved to have some coffee at the moment, even though it has no effect on me. But I know though that for a lot of other people, caffeine really does have a major impact on them and their mental health, their ability to sleep, and how they fit and how they feel though. One of my housemates' mums, they cannot have a coffee after 2 p.m. or they will be up all night, which I always find quite interesting because I have it quite a lot within reason. So I think though that the takeaway from this psychology news section is simply just if you're a young person, I would say don't have a caffeine. Do not have a caffeine close to bedtime. To be honest, no one should have coffee close to bedtime because caffeine is bad. It does mess up your sleep. This is something though that all of us have just got to be mindful of, especially because I've already done a podcast episode previously about why a consistent sleep schedule is really important for your mental health. So please, this is mainly a clinical psychology podcast. So, in the sake of protecting your mental health in the long term, please avoid caffeine before bed. So, the second one is karma rewards us, punishes others. Why do good and bad things happen to us? For many, the answer isn't random chance, it's karma. Across cultures and belief systems, the Buddhist and Hindu ideas of a karma offers some people a way of understanding life's ups and downs. Good deeds bring future rewards, bad deeds bring justified consequences. Whilst believers often see karma as the universal law, however, they might not always apply it evenly. Writing in the Psychology of Religion and Spirituality, Sindel J. M. White and colleagues from York University explore how some people who believe in karma often use the theory selectively, finding that they're more likely to see karma play out when it flatters our own good deeds and when others suffer in ways we think they deserve. So this is definitely a good one because I do not believe in karma, but if other people do, then that's perfectly fine. Fine though. But I think that this plays out in a lot of different psychological processes. That we always like to reward ourselves, we always like to maintain our own positive self image, our own self esteem, and we always like to believe that we are an inherently good person. And whenever we do bad actions, or whenever people aren't happy with us, we always tend to minimize our negatives and we always try and amplify our positives, even if, in the grand scheme of things, our positive actions haven't actually done that much. All of us do this. I am absolutely no different whatsoever. And I do think that this applies to karma. And I also think that the idea of karma, especially when it comes to the other people suffering in the ways we think they deserve, I definitely think that that's penetrated mainstream society. Because my parents use that phrase, lots of my friends do, other people do use that a phrase. About karma is a B word, for example. So I think if I try and think about this from an applied perspective, I don't think there's anything we can do with this knowledge except from just be aware of amplifying your positives and minimizing your negatives. And sometimes I think we all just need to try and be a bit more balanced about ourselves. That we're if we do something great, that is really good. But are we as brilliant and as great as we think we're going, as we think we are? It's just something to think about. So the final one is, why aren't we doing more open research? Open quote. Open research, the practice of making as much of our research process as freely available as possible, is increasingly mainstream, required by funders, and recognized by a growing number of institutes in their promotion frameworks. But why should we make our research open? Who benefits from this? Perhaps we need to think harder about how we can make the most of our open research output, the study protocols, information sheets, consent forms, data and code, and so on. How can we ensure that the public receives the greatest return on their investment in our work? Close quote. So that's a new article in the Psychologist magazine, which I've got to read at some point. I do understand the basic point behind this, because in all of my psychology assignments, in all psychology papers that are published, authors always have to provide study protocols, information sheets, consent forms, data, etc. To be honest, has any one of us actually ever used it? I have not. I have never loved the paper so much that I've decided to look at how they've done it. Equally, yeah, that is only for the studies that have actually provided it. When there's a study that I really want to look at, and there's a study that I really want to replicate or borrow something from, or just at least get inspired by it, they don't provide this stuff. So I think as an academic and as a psychology student, yes, I would absolutely love it if this is compulsory, because it would make my research and me writing an introduction or planning a methodology so much easier. But in terms of a consumer, in terms of a person who lives and breathes in society and wants to help people, I don't know how this helps the lay people. I don't know how this helps non-psychology people though. And to be honest, if we take biology for example, I love biology. I fully believe in it. I think it's a powerful force for good. For good though. But I'm not a biologist, so I don't know how open research would help me personally, as someone who doesn't specialize in biology, if all biology researchers suddenly did open research. I couldn't understand the data, so I don't know how it could help me. And I think that is what this article is thinking about. So I think at the end of this psychology news article, maybe this week, maybe spend some time thinking about these three questions. How do you personally benefit from open research? Think about a subject that you don't study, like biology, chemistry, physics, etc. How would open research in that discipline help you? And then finally, how could you make open research more accessible and useful for lay people? It's just something fun to think about this week. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. This week has been so much fun. It's been really brilliant. And I'm definitely going to try and keep this personal update short because I'm tired, to be honest. So this week has been really busy, filled with outreach work. So it was the last week of the summer core period, and I had to present some really good session. So Monday was another Year 8 housing challenge. So Year 8 students who were about 12 or 13 years old, they come up to the university and they designed some university accommodation. And I actually got some lovely feedback from the school that were like, they really liked how I present, they were really grateful, they loved how I worked with the students, and I really, inspired them. And in my group, specifically, there was a visually impaired girl, which was really interesting from a learning point of view because I had to adapt how I teach, I had to adapt how I talk, just how I present. And that was a real learning curve, and it was really interesting to see how she typed in Braille. I didn't know that was actually possible. So it was a lot of fun and it was a useful experience. Then I was also presenting some pigment painting sessions. So we're using natural pigments in like colour and painting. I actually told some students some completely wrong information because there was some bone pigments. And the story that I told was that like a woman that goes walking along Whitstable Beach, which is a local beach, to Canterbury. She finds bones. She takes them homes, put them in her, puts them in her oven. Then she grinds them up, and she puts them in her oven to scorch them. Nope, in reality, none of that is true whatsoever. And I was telling tons of students this. Then what happened was I found out that the actual story was this woman that goes in the Thames estuary, finds bones, finds like fossilized bones and stuff, then she takes them home and she grinds them up. Nothing, nowhere near as cool as my story, and the students loved my story. Turns out the truth is never as interesting as my fiction. Oh, to be honest, there might be a short story there. Don't know if I could do that. Maybe like a fancy element. Oh, again, I might do that. Thank you, podcast. I would never would have done that if I hadn't told you that story. Yeah, but then there were lots of other great events. And then last night I went out with the other ambassadors and to like celebrate the end of the summer call, and that all of us believe in. It was a great night. And to be honest, I was sort of like the laughing joke because in the UK there's this place called Weatherspoons, and they do refillable coffees for £1.79. I know. So all of the other ambassadors, they were getting shots, alcoves, pictures of cocktails. I was getting my little refillable mug of coffee, and I had like 3 or 4 decaf mochas every time that we went there because we went back to Weatherspoons twice in one night. So I was in my element, but I did realise that I was getting more and more tired and less inhibited. Turns out I don't even need alcohol. Of course, I didn't do anything because I was sober. But yeah, it was just really, really a fun night. So I really do recommend it. And it was so nice to be around people who couldn't care less that I wasn't drinking, and they were laughing with me, not at me for not drinking. So it was a brilliant fun though. So finally, I've now got proof that you can enjoy university without having to drink. And then I was just playing board games with a friend of mine all the day today. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me at connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always tweet on Twitter at Sci-Fi Whiteley or leave a comment on the Facebook post at Sci-Fi Whiteley. And always feel free to send pictures of where you're listening from. I always love to hear where all of you are all over the world. And the reason why I really like hearing that from all of you is because it helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Careers in Psychology, a guide to careers in business psychology, clinical psychology, forensic psychology, and more. So this is a brilliant sponsor for today's episode because having a psychology degree is amazing. I will never deny that. Because having a psychology degree opens up so many doors for you. You can work in forensic psychology, clinical psychology, mental health, media psychology, educational psychology. You could also work in academia as an experimental psychologist, etc. You could also work as a business psychologist and so many more other brilliant job roles within psychology. But you can only work in these psychology job roles if you know that they're there. So that's what this great, really interesting and engaging book helps you to understand about careers in psychology. So you'll understand what you can work as, what are the entry requirements, how would you get in to this job, and so many more brilliant, fascinating concepts and possible job roles for you in the future. So I really do recommend this brilliant book. So with that is Careers in Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can, as selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble, and selected live systems like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you are wanting to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and support it on a monthly basis and get access to tons of great rewards, including 60 exclusive blog posts that won't be made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. If you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/the Psychology World Podcast. So that's enough for personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So like I probably mentioned in the introduction, I decided to just put on the microphone and I decided just to talk about the disillusionment I have with clinical psychology. Because to be honest, I didn't really want to talk about this, and this isn't scripted. This is very much me just talking about how I'm feeling, because I'm feeling exhausted, to be honest, very disillusioned, and just quite, I don't know, burnout. I don't think is the right word, because sure, I'm tired, but I really have been managing my energy levels recently because of my outreach work, and because I've been doing so much outreach tutoring, so I've been presenting sessions. I know that because that's very performative for me, I really have had to think about my energy levels and just be very mindful of it, and I really am managing. But at the end of this, I'm just so disillusioned with clinical psychology. I will talk about that after a bit of context. So, for a bit of context, why am I talking about this? So, at the time of recording, it is July 2025, and I'm just about to finish my clinical psychology masters. And I've done my masters for the past 2 years because I did it part time. I've had an amazing time. I've learned so much about clinical psychology, so much more about therapy models, psychological assessments, how to reform elation. One of my favourite modules was the neuropsychology of aging, which is something I thought I was absolutely going to hate, and I thought it would be the worst thing ever for me. However, it was actually brilliant. It was one of my favourite modules. I learned so much about cognitive behavioural therapy and adapting it for older adults. I learned about the mental health needs and the suicide risk of older adults. And I learned how the aging brain and the aging process impacts our behaviour in so many brilliant, fascinating ways that I flat out love. And it was such a fun module. Even statistics, even though I still hate statistics with an utter passion, it was amazing fun. And I learned stuff. I definitely learned some stuff, for sure. I can name none of it off the top of my head, but it was still quite life-changing. And it certainly gave me a lot of gossip because of how bad the lecture was. So I've loved my masters for the past 2 years. Also, my undergraduate, which I started at my same university in 2019. I did a 4-year undergraduate where I made so many valuable connections. And I've spoken a lot about my psychology journey in the past. And I did a year's research placement at my university where I took part in some major research projects, which again taught me so many valuable skills. And even now at open days at my university, I still reference those valuable experiences. It taught me how to improve my academic writing, the valuable connections that I made, and those connections are still like serving me today. And it was only the other day that I had an email from someone who I used to work with, and we had a really good conversation about one of the papers that we were going to publish. So again, though, those connections are really helpful, and I've loved my undergrad. But I've spoken about all of this before on the podcast. So I've done 6 years of a study. I have worked so hard. I've written so many essays. I've cried. I've done so much to pass my degree and make sure that it's a good pass. Also, in the aims of becoming a clinical psychologist, I've started this podcast. Every week, without fail, sometimes twice a week, I produce a psychology podcast episode just so I can keep learning, keep enjoying, keep being inspired by this amazing profession that we get to work with. Whether it's therapy, whether it's an aspect of clinical psychology, whether it is an aspect of mental health, I love it. I explore it. And none of this was taught to me in my lecture theatres. This is always me going above and beyond. And I've written my books, I've researched them, I've created my books. I've had a brilliant time doing all of this in the hopes of becoming an aspiring clinical psychologist. And I think I do want to be a clinical psychologist to some extent. However, I will mention why I'm starting to doubt this in a little bit. And something else, though, is that I've had to deal with so much over the past few years, like child abuse, my intensely homophobic, hateful relationships, and with my family, my social environment. They hated me being gay. I was in fear for my life. I thought that if they found out I was gay, I would be beaten, killed, and made homeless. Of course, if they didn't kill me at that point, which I was certain they would because of the stuff that my social environment would say to me, would say about gay people, etc. So that was really scary for me. Also, I've had to deal with my rape. Like, I was raped in April 2024. And as all of you know from the podcast, especially if you listened in 2024, I was depressed. I had massive social anxiety. I had PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. My mental health was horrific most days. I couldn't get out of bed. I could barely do anything. I had to skip lectures, to be honest, just so I could work, one, to get money. And it's just all of those sort of factors. I get money, keep my mind busy, and just try and escape the rape memories, the rape thoughts, the flashbacks for just a little while longer. That was hard. That was next to impossible to deal with at times. And hell, I tried to kill myself 3 times last year because it was so traumatic being raped. Then I also had to deal with anorexia and the horrific toll that took on my health, like not wanting to eat, having panic attacks about the smell of food, so I didn't want to get fat. I wanted to control an aspect of my life that my rapist couldn't touch. So those are the mental health aspects. So as you can see, mental health has taken up a massive bit of my time, as has the counselling. Like, I've been through counselling 3 times now, and thankfully I'm finally at a place in my life where it's really worked for me. It's helpful, it's inspiring, and I've learned so much about myself, and my mental health is brilliant. However, because of my mental health, because of the really bad state of postgraduate loans here in the UK, I've had to really focus on getting money. Now, personally, I have not minded that. I've actually had amazing fun collecting money. For example, my outreach work. Because I had to get money to survive, I really had to do a lot of outreach work, which was why me doing a part-time degree was super valuable. I've made so many good connections. I made friends. I've gained so many egg experiences. For example, because I was able to do so much outreach work, I was able to do Breakfast Club, which meant I got to interact and work with all autistic kids, kids with social anxiety, other neurodivergent kids. And it was only yesterday, for example, I was working with a visually impaired student. So I was able to interact and work with her and change my presentation style to match her needs just so she could thrive. And it was fascinating talking to her teacher. Just brilliant. So I've learned a lot of experiences from that. But this is why I'm starting to doubt my want to be a clinical psychologist. Because I've had to work so much, I'm not able to get the volunteering experience that you need to be able to be a clinical psychologist. So let me explain that in a little more detail on where this doubt started to come from. So recently, I've been starting to read the amazing book, The Clinical Psychologist Collective by Dr. Marianne Trent. It's a brilliant book. I highly, highly recommend it. Now, the thing about that book is that it's a massive collection of about, 20 or 30 clinical psychologists talking about how they got onto the clinical psychology doctorate. Now, there are a few things about this book. So there are some common themes. Of course, everyone's journey onto the clinical doctorate is very different, but there are some common themes. And there are 2 themes I want to address here. Firstly, you've got to make clinical psychology your entire life. You've got to live, breathe, and eat clinical psychology and mental health. Also, you need to be able to get experience. Now, those 2 things actually don't align with me anymore. And that I found quite surprising and quite shocking. Because, yes, I live and I breathe psychology. I do this podcast. I do my psychology books. I do my lectures. I do my degree. But in reality, that is not enough to be a clinical psychologist. And also, I like hanging out with my friends. I like writing my fiction. I like running my publishing business. I like doing my outreach work. I like doing stuff that isn't psychology related. In fact, I can't function if I'm only doing psychology. If I only did psychology and if I only did mental health, that would be my idea of hell, to be honest, because as much as I love this amazing profession, I need other stuff in my life. But these people who go on to the clinical psychology doctorate actually don't tend to do that, which for me is quite heartbreaking because I love this profession, but I don't want it to be my life. I have met amazing students who are the lovely, most kindest people who have ever lived, and their entire life is psychology. I've seen their life. That is not me. I don't want to be like them. And if that means I don't get to be a clinical psychologist, that's okay. Because this also connects with a lot of other things. Because if your entire life is clinical psychology, then you hunt those work experience opportunities. You look at everything that you possibly can have. You will look at extra schemes, extra volunteering opportunities, etc. You move heaven and earth, and you sacrifice so much to become a clinical psychologist. Which, if that is you, more power to you. I think you are amazing if you want to do that. But me, I have already sacrificed so much to get where I am. I've sacrificed so much just to still be alive, to be honest. After my rape, my child abuse, my anorexia, everything I've had to deal with, I have had to make sacrifices for. And I think I'm at the end of my tether about what I'm willing to sacrifice. Because after my anorexia counselling, I really did focus on my values, my ideal life, and what I want. And I'm just starting to build and recover my life from the hell of 2024. The year where everything in my life burnt to the ground because of how bad my trauma was and my PTSD was. I lost friends. I had to reset relationships. There's everything in books coming out about it because I just had to write, I had to process it. It was hell. So I have had to sacrifice so much through 2024. So this leads me on to another bit. Because of my mental health, because of me wanting to do other things with my life, I have not had the time or the energy to pursue the volunteering opportunities that you need to do in clinical psychology to be able to get a foot in the door. But this is the thing, you need experience to be able to get a job in mental health, or to be honest, any job. But if you can't get a job, how are you meant to get the mental health experience? And yes, there are some amazing students who are able to juggle stuff. I'm not one of them. I am human. I have my difficulties. I have my struggles. I have my energy levels. Like being autistic, neurodivergent, an introvert, a business owner, writer, psychology student, outreach, tutor, lead ambassador, etc. They all take their toll on me. I don't have time. I do not have a single day where I could volunteer without having massive implications for my own health. And I can't do that to myself anymore. I have tried so much to grind myself into the dirt, working, trying to survive, trying to get where I want to be. I just can't do it anymore because that work life balance is basically makes my mental health really bad. It means that I can't function for days. It means I just lie in bed, just trying to feel better and recover. That is me. And the very idea that because of my mental health, because of how bad my physical health has been, because of my anorexia, and just how I'm trying to survive and cope, and because I need the money, so I cannot take unpaid work. All of that means I cannot be a clinical psychologist. And that is disgusting. That is why I'm so disillusioned with our profession. Because I'm passionate. I love this profession. I want to help people. I have been trying to validate people more, to try and be better, try to be more welcoming to our future clients. To some extent, it almost seems like none of that matters, because as much as I love this profession, as much as I do, or as much as I do these podcasts, as much as I love talking about psychology with people, it doesn't matter. That's how I feel at this point. Because I've not been able to get this work experience, because I cannot afford to get the volunteering, I cannot afford to do unpaid work. And there was this quote in the Clinical Psychology Collective that really stuck with me. I had the financial backing of my parents. My parents are not poor, but they could not support me financially for a year and pay my bills for me and afford me to live, for me to do a year full-time unpaid work experience and unpaid row. They couldn't. And that's literally what some people have had to do in to be able to become a clinical psychologist. And that's disgusting. That is why psychology is such a white, middle-class female profession. And it's starting to hit me now just how hard that is to change. These are massive societal forces that we just can't change, basically, unless something major happens. So, as difficult as it is, I'm thinking, will I be able to do any role in mental health? Because I have stepped back and I have gone, right, clinical psychology might not be for me. Okay, what other mental health roles could I look at? And I've looked. I've looked because I worked a careers fair and there was an NHS stand and there was a massive booklet on psychological therapies. So I looked. A psychological wellbeing practitioner? Brilliant, and I've applied for some jobs. I'm really looking forward to that if it ever happens. I don't think it would. But those trainee roles, again, super competitive. And you need mental health experience. Okay, it's a brilliant role. I would love it to be a psychological wellbeing practitioner. Also, an education mental health practitioner. Brilliant role. I've applied for some. It sounds really exciting. It sounds right up my street. Working in the schools, working with children. Sounds brilliant. Again, you sort of need mental health experience. Even though I've worked 6 years with children. I've looked into being a therapist. And not a clinical psychologist, but a therapist. Issue with that is you need mental health experience. And you need another postgraduate qualification in a specific form of therapy. I've already done a master's. I've already done an undergrad. I don't really want to do yet another master's or postgraduate qualification at this time. If it was for a trainee position, like trainee psychological wellbeing practitioner, or another apprenticeship, I wouldn't mind that because I would be working and I would have a full-time job and I would have a job on the side. I don't mind that. A therapist? No, because you need a lot of experience and you need another postgraduate qualification that isn't an apprenticeship. I've looked at being a counsellor because someone from Outreach is a counsellor and she's amazing. I'm hopefully going to work with her tomorrow. I've looked that you need your level 2, 3 and 4 qualification to be able to be a therapist. No, to be able to be a counsellor. Again, I've already done a master's and an undergrad. I don't really want to do yet another 3 years of study just to get another qualification. Well, yes, by the end of it, if I'm able to get on it, if I'm able to do my 100 hours, I would be a fully qualified counsellor. But then there's still the issue of finding a job at the end. And I think the reason why I feel like this is just because it's like, what's the point? And I know this is a very depressing episode, but I think we all feel like this. Thankfully, I have sort of got a plan. There are backup options. I am going to still keep applying for mental health professions. I'm still going to keep applying for mental health roles, whether it's pastoral, whether it's mental health, whether it's an assistant psychologist position, whether it's so many other connected roles when it comes to mental health. I'm still going to keep trying, keep applying, because one day I might get there. I might get someone who wants to take a chance on me. And I really hope that someone does, because I am caring. I care about people so much. I want people to be okay. Because as I literally said on my supporting letter, because I thought, right, I'm just going to be authentically me. I talk about this stuff enough. And if any employer looked at the podcast, looked at my books, they would know I was raped. So I literally said in one of my statements, I have been raped, I have been through anorexia, I've been through PTSD, I've been through child abuse. And I know how valuable counseling, therapy, psychology is. Psychology changes lives. I want to do that for other people. But because I've got to work, because I've had to take time out for myself, because I've got to focus on my own mental health, I've not been able to get this mythical, magical volunteering experience that this profession needs. And because I can't do that, because I'm not privileged enough, the doors are basically shut to me after 6 years of study. That is outrageous. That is disgusting. And I think that is why this is sort of turned into a small rant. I'm going to keep trying. I'm not going to shut the door, but I am going to focus on other careers at times. Because I know come September, come 2 months' time, I am not going to be able to have a mental health job. And part of me really hopes this episode is completely null void come September. But part of me doesn't think it will. And that's a shame, because I love mental health. I'm so glad to want to work in this profession. I've been so privileged the past 6 years to work with, to be taught by, and to be able just to discuss their research, their lives. So many amazing clinical psychologists. And I would love to be one of them. I would love to inspire the next generation. And I think I will through this podcast and my books. But me being a mental health practitioner, I don't know if that's going to be me in the future. Just because of my life situations. Because I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Yes, I know that's hyperbole. And yes, I know that's probably annoying to some people. That's how I'm feeling. So, at the end of this podcast episode, I want to say to you, dear listener, if you've just finished your degree, and if you're feeling disillusioned, concerned, and nervous about your future working in mental health, I would say just check in with yourself. Make sure you're okay, practice self care, and really think about what you want. Though, because this is something that I did based on a line in the Clinical Psychology Collective. I focused on what do you really want to do with your life, and is clinical psychology the best way to do it? My why boils down to something very simple. I want to help people. There are other ways to help people with their mental health than clinical psychology. Because clinical psychologists are clinicians, practitioners, advocates, researchers, policy writers, and so many more other roles. They are a supervisor. They are a paper pusher at times. That's what some of the stories are that I hear from my lecturers. that is not what I want to do. So that's something that I'm thinking about. And I don't know what I'm going to decide, besides from just keep applying to lots of roles and just hope I get a job at some point. Because, yeah, in an ideal fantasy world, I would say, right, I'm going to finish my master's, then I'm going to take a year out doing nothing but volunteering. I don't have that option. I don't want that option at this point, because I'm like, if this profession requires me to do a year's unpaid work experience, which is what it feels like at this point, then I'm okay not working in it. I'm very upset. I'm really tired. I'm very disillusioned. So if you're feeling this, just know you're not alone. Turns out I've been looking at stuff online. This is a very common feeling amongst graduates, especially mental health graduates, like clinical psychology. So I hope this long, rambly reflection and this podcast episode has been useful with you. I really hope it has, and I'm actually feeling a lot better now. I partly wish that I've done this episode before 9:10 at night, just so I could hopefully get a burst of productive energy, but I actually do feel a lot better now. Thank you for listening. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did. And if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Clinical Psychology 2nd edition, available for all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore, or local library if you requested. And you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble, and Spotify, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. And if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. And please let me know what your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always contact me on my social media or by emailing me at connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.